Hello and welcome everyone to the Nonprofit Leadership Center 2023 webinar series. Today, James Goalder is going to be bringing us through how to use data and segmentation to raise more money. A little bit about James. With nearly 20 years of experience working in nonprofit technology, sales, and relationship management, James brings the perfect blend of experience to his role as partnerships manager at Bloomerang. In addition to his work experience, James volunteers with Project Grows, a community farm in Virginia, serving on the board and on volunteer nights with the organization. Our moderator today is our one and only Karina Kletter, Program Associate here at NLC, and I'm handing it over to Karina for some other information.
Thank you so much, Marielle. So I'll just go over a few rules of the road for participating in today's webinar. To minimize background noise and distractions, all lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar. The session is being recorded and will be available on our website in the next few days. We will also share the slide deck when we post the recording. You may have noticed that we have live captions enabled, which is a Zoom accessibility feature. If you find them distracting, or if you would like to see them but don't see them yet, you can enable or disable them by going to the bottom of your Zoom screen and clicking on the icon that says CC Live Transcript. Once you click that, click the button that says Disable Auto Transcription or Enable Auto Transcription. We warmly welcome your questions. Please type them in the chat as they come up for you, and we'll take 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for James to answer as many as we're able to get to. If you haven't found the chat box yet, go to the settings at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on chat. And if you haven't already, please share the name of your organization in the chat box. We're so delighted to have James Goalder with us today and look forward to a great informative webinar. On to you, James. James, you're muted still.
Gosh, it's like we haven't been doing this for the last couple of years. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So hi, everyone. I'm James Goalder. I work with Bloomerang. We are a donor database company, and I'm really happy to be here today to talk with you all about how to use data and segmentation to raise more money. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. A little bit more information about me. I've been with Bloomerang now for 8.5 years. Although my first job, as you can see, was at a McDonald's drive-thru, and I assure you that no stress level that I have experienced since then can match a Sunday afternoon rush after church was over, trying to keep that line moving on through. So that was got me nice and prepared for any sort of stressful part of any of my jobs since then. I want to highlight on this list here the third bullet point, not the kids, don't worry about them, the 2 kids, a dog, and 3 foster kittens. So we have a small zoo in our house, and you may see furry bodies wandering around on my camera. I will do my best not to be distracted by them. Just be aware that that does happen sometimes. Yeah. All right, so some information here about Bloomerang. If you'd like more information, there's a link down there at the bottom. I think we also have a QR code in a little bit that you can visit as well. So please feel free to visit those. And then my email will also be at the end. And you are always free just to email me directly and ask me any questions. Okay, we also have a fundraising, planning, and climate report. So we surveyed over 1,000 fundraisers last year, right about this time, and asked them all sorts of questions: what their biggest hurdles were going to be, what challenges they were going to face in 2023 and beyond, and what their plans were for how to address that. And then we compiled all of that information into this ebook. So as was mentioned earlier, these slides are going to be sent out to you all later. If you can't catch the QR code here in time, don't worry, you'll be able to access them tomorrow or whenever those go out. But take a look at that survey. There's a lot of really interesting information in there, and stuff that you can kind of compare yourself with. Okay, so the agenda for today, we're going to talk before we dig into how to clean your data, segmentation, all of that kind of stuff, I'm going to talk about why this is so important. And then we're going to look at the importance of maintaining good, clean data. We're going to look at some real life examples of what a couple of nonprofits near me, what they did in the last couple of years and how they were really successful segmenting their data, and then why the personal touch is so important. So lots of stuff to get through today. And as Karina mentioned, I'll be more than happy to try to answer questions as we go, but then there's also some time at the end as well that we've devoted to that. So please don't be shy about putting the questions in the chat. We'll get to those as quickly as we can. So I wanted to zoom out a little bit before we dig in and start looking at segmentation and all of that and talk about why this is so important. Those of you who are familiar with Bloomerang know that we are nerds. I think that's the best way to put it. We love data. So we dig into the fundraising effectiveness project and any other kind of data around the fundraising world that we can get our hands on. The fundraising effectiveness project, for those of you that don't know, is a group associated with AFP. And they take a lot of data from multiple database companies. So Bloomerang is a part of that, Razor's Edge, Blackbaud, Little Green Light, Donor Perfect, Neon. There are a lot of these companies that send anonymous data to the fundraising effectiveness project, and FEP aggregates that data and then looks at trends. So they look at the donor universe. How many donors are there in a given year? Is the money, the overall donations, are they going up? Are they going down? How are we doing with retention? So how many donors are coming back year after year after year, and so on. And then they make this data available usually around the big AFP Icon conference in April usually. And then nerds like us dig through and really try to slice and dice all of that and get a better handle on what's going on in the fundraising world. So it takes a lot of time, but we are able to then identify some of the trends that you see here. So as we're looking at this, let's step back in time in our memories just for a second here. As much as we probably want to forget what happened in 2020 and 2021, it's helpful to remember all of that for just a second. So generally speaking, in 2020, a lot of nonprofits saw a nice boost in both donors and in donations. Not everybody, certainly, but if you're in any sort of health and human services or anything like that, you almost certainly saw a little bit of a jump there. And if we think back to the early days of the pandemic, it starts to kind of come back a little bit there. Everybody was, completely confused, didn't know what was going to happen. We were in a lockdown, and then we kind of went back to work and school, but more of a hybrid, and we weren't really doing events anymore, but then we figured out how to do remote events, and it was all very uncertain and confusing for both us and our donors. But one of the things that did happen is that a lot of donors stepped up to the plate. So I know in my family, for instance, we decided every week that we were going to go to a new restaurant in the area to support our local businesses. So we didn't actually go to the restaurant. We ordered from them, and then, we went and picked it up and brought it back here at home to eat. But we did that for a good year anyway, just to support local businesses. And especially at the end of the year, we did the same thing with local nonprofits. We knew that, the Boys and Girls Club here in town, our local homeless shelter, we knew that they weren't getting the volunteer support that they were needing. They weren't really, maybe in some cases, getting a lot of financial assistance. So we tried to do what we could with all of that. And I don't think we were unique. I think there were a lot of donors who did that. And so we were kind of all expecting a little bit of a drop then in 2021, right? And that's what happened. If you look at this number up here, the donor universe, the number of donors overall dropped about 5-6% from 2020 to 2021. What we didn't expect was the number that came out this April, and that's that drop continued. So we were not anticipating that to happen. I think most of us thought, okay, we're going to kind of see a little bit of a dip, and then it's going to come back up because a lot of organizations were starting to do more events last year. maybe it was still hybrid, but they were kind of getting back to normal. And so we thought, well, with those events, we're going to see more new donors. We're going to see maybe some more mid-level donors. So we're going to see kind of a righting of that ship, so to speak. And that didn't happen. If anything, the donor universe shrunk by another 10%, which is a pretty big number. If we look at the donations, they stayed relatively flat. So as we'll see in a couple of slides here, not accounting for inflation, the donations stayed pretty level, which is good. But what that tells me is that while the donor universe shrunk, the donations stayed the same. So that tells me that we went back to our major donors a lot. And that's what we've heard. If you think back a couple of slides ago to that survey we took of the fundraisers, what we heard a lot of in that survey is concerns over donor fatigue, especially as it comes to their major donors. So, and the numbers really kind of back that up. If you look at the new donors down below that, they have dropped consistently over the last couple of years. I think that makes sense. That's telling me that without those events, without our golf tournaments and our galas and our pup struts and our wine pairings and all kinds of those fun things that we're doing, we're not seeing the new donors walk in the door. I think that makes sense. I'm really hoping that next April, looking back to this year that we're in now, we're going to see that number start to go up some, which is really good. So all of this to say, and all of the next couple of slides to say that really reaching out to the right donors at the right time is really, really important. So as our donor universe is shrinking and as the number of donors we have is falling, we need to make sure that we're reaching the right donor at the right time with the right message. And that's what this is all about here. So we're going to dig into these numbers a little bit more real quick, and then we're going to talk about how we can make sure that we are touching those right donors at the right time with the right message. So if we look at micro donors and small donors, we see pretty big drops, frankly. Again, I think that's probably attributable to not being able to hold events. So it's not too much of a surprise. We see that the number of the mid-level donors and the number of the major supersized donors stayed the same, which tracks with what we've been talking about. So in other words, we went back to our major donors and said, hey, you've been so generous and so wonderful. We can't tell you how much we appreciate that. Because we haven't been able to hold events, we really need you to step it up again a little bit more. Can we count on a little bit more from you this year? And it seems like that message was pretty well received. But again, as we're talking with fundraisers, they're telling us they're concerned about donor fatigue and maybe even donor burnout. So as we look at the number of donors and the dollars, we see exactly what we've been talking about here. So there was a little bump in the dollars here in 2021, then essentially flat last year in 2022. However, if we all think back to the price of eggs, the price of gas, all of those fun things that were hit so much by inflation, the fact that we stayed flat actually isn't a good thing. We need to make sure that we're keeping pace with inflation, and we did not do that last year. So I'm hoping to see some new data in 6 months or so that will show us that this year we did better with that. So fingers crossed there. So the biggest takeaway from all of this data, again, the large and the sticky donors helped keep the dollar growth positive or the same last year. Unfortunately, though, new and small donors were not being acquired or recaptured, which leads to that drop in the donor universe. And then the large and highly committed donors were staying around. They were stepping up to the plate and doing what we asked them to do. Those small and infrequent and new donors were being left behind. So think through at the bottom there, your fundraising mix. How are you appealing to these multiple groups of donors? How are you approaching them? How are you having different conversations with them and so on? Because you want to make sure that you're approaching them in different ways. Definitely not a one size fits all approach there. So talking about clean data and data segmentation, if we're going to talk about segmenting our approach, looking at, all right, we need to look at our small donors and approach them with a different message from our mid-level donors, which is a different message from our major donors. The first thing that we need to do is figure out how to make sure that we have good, clean data. So that can be as simple as running a national change of address. If you haven't done that for a while, you might contact your database provider and see if that's something that they can do for you. There may be a charge for that. It may not be. It depends on who you use. At Bloomerang, we do that every single day for our users, but other database providers will have different situations and different setups with all of that. So contact them and see if you can get all of that information up to date, because if you're going to be approaching someone with direct mail, for instance, you want to make sure that you're actually going to get that letter to them when you send it to them. But we also want to think through our donation history. So does our system, whether it's Excel or a more formal database, is it capturing all of the donations and those interactions from the myriad of ways that people are interacting with us? And here's what I mean by that. If you think about your what we at Bloomerang call your tech stack, do you have one system for donations, event attendance, email, volunteering perhaps, or are all of those things kind of spread out? Does your donor database capture online donations for you, or are you having to go to PayPal or some other system and pull that information into your donor database? The more that you can keep that data in one place will allow you to predict how engaged and connected your donors are. That's going to allow you to really dig in and make sure that you're sending those targeted emails to the appropriate groups. So if you're able to bring all of that data into one place, that's kind of the ideal situation. It's not always possible. I totally understand that. So it may be that you have your donor database over here, and let's say that they do handle online donations and they do handle your email newsletter and all of that, but they don't handle volunteer activity. No worries. Do the best that you can with it. If there's some sort of import-export functionality that you can use to take advantage of that, see if you can get that data into your donor database, because that's going to allow you to really dig into some of these segments we're going to look at in a couple of minutes here. Oh, thanks, Karina, for the chat there. Yeah, that's great. Send those questions on in. Okay, so data hygiene. It's never a bad idea to have someone from the outside of the organization take a look at your data and assess how clean it is, and let you know maybe where some of those gaps or some of those holes are. So you might do that through consultants. If you are looking at getting a new donor database and you need to take your data from whatever the system it's in now to that new donor database, have that be part of your evaluation. Talk through with your salesperson, what does that whole process look like? Do you all do anything, any kind of cleanup with our old data, or are you just kind of taking what we have and plugging it into the new place? Because a lot of companies will help you make your data a little more hygienic. So if you have duplicates, they can help you with that. They can clean up your addresses and all of that. They can merge people that need to be merged. And then they can also look and make sure that your data is standardized. So if you have all of your donations in a spreadsheet, let's say, is it possible that some of those gifts might be to your general operating fund, but others might be to another fund that you have, or a different program or something like that? Those sometimes those database companies can have those conversations with you and help make sure that all of that information is as up to date as possible. Having said that, in my almost 9 years at Bloomerang, about 7.5 of which were on the sales team, I can tell you that's not a topic of conversation that comes up very much. So when you're talking with any database company, talk with them about that. Find out, what does that process look like? If we hand over our data to you, are you going to help us get it so that it's more manageable and more usable and more hygienic? And that person then, or your implementation engineer, can walk through with you what your data needs are and where your gaps are. I'll also throw out there that there are a lot of consultants who would be happy to look at the data with you as well. So I certainly understand if the idea of talking to someone in a donor database is a little daunting, or if that's not something you need right now, no worries. Talk to a consultant. There are a lot of them out there that'll be glad to look at that data with you and figure out what needs to be done to enrich that data. Let's see. Casey, yeah, problem with duplicates. It's never ending. Yeah, it's tricky. A lot of systems, you know, code up based on email addresses and all of that. So if someone mistypes something, you're going to get duplicates in there. It's a mess. It's one of those. Yeah, you're nodding. I know it's fun. Hopefully you have a system that has a merge functionality so that you can run a report, see a list of possible merges, and then say, yes, let's merge these people or not, depending on what they need there. So we've got a couple of different suggestions here for where to start with your segmentation. This is one of my favorites here. So take a look, if you're able to run these reports in your database, take a look at above the average donation amount and any gifts below your average donation amount. So figure out what your average donation amount is, and then look at who's been giving to you above and below that. That's going to tell you a whole lot. So if you're down over here, right, with your repeat donors, so these people have donated at least a couple of times, and they're below the average gift amount, probably they're not able to give a major gift. Probably. Now, if you have donor search or iWaves or something like that, it's always a good idea to run them through some wealth screening and verify that. If you don't have access to those wealth screening tools, that's okay. You can assume it's probably that they don't have the capacity to do a $5,000 gift or you know, whatever that number might look like. On the other hand, if you have a brand new donor over here that is below the average gift amount, that doesn't tell you as much. So very, very few people start out giving a gift at whatever their capacity, their highest capacity level is. So if I have a capacity to write you a check for $5,000, very rarely will my first gift be for $5,000. Normally, I'm going to kind of test the water a little bit. Maybe I'm at an event with you and I really feel that strong emotional connection. I'm buying into your mission. I'm excited to further the cause. I'm still not going to write even maybe a $2,000 check. I may end up writing, you know, 500 maybe, but more than likely it's probably $50, $100, something along those lines, because I want to see what happens. We're going to look in a few slides here at why people stop giving and talk about that a little bit. So that's what the first gift is for, to test it out, see how it goes, see what happens, and then we can have conversations about bigger gifts on down the line. Having said that, if you get this situation right here, where you have a brand new donor that is above your average gift amount, alarm bells should be going out. Well, not alarm bells, like jingle bells or something happy. That's really good. It's a really, really good sign. So if someone's first gift is higher than your average gift amount, pay attention to that. Take them out for coffee, invite them in to take a tour, try to get them to volunteer, do something to engage with them, because they're sending up a big bat signal up in the sky that is saying, hey, I'm really passionate about your organization. I really dig what you guys are doing and I want to be a part of it. I want to support it. So make sure that you pay close attention to that. That's a really, really important segment for you all to keep track of. So how would you approach these people a little bit differently than in your communications? So if you have someone who's a repeat donor up here with above the average donation amount, that's telling you that they probably have a slightly higher capacity, and you probably want to approach them as a potential major donor. So if you have the capacity to look at them, again, with a donor search or an iWaves or a wealth engine or something like that, you can verify that, you can figure out what their capacity is, and then go ahead and approach them from there. If you don't have that ability, though, that's okay. Go ahead and assume that right here, these folks have the capacity. Maybe they can't do $5,000, but they can probably do a little bit higher maybe than they've been doing. So approach them a little bit differently, take them out to lunch, coffee, whatever. We've talked about your new donors here. If they are above the average gift amount, definitely schedule a lunch with them or something where you can find out a little bit more, find out what they're passionate about, why they started giving to you, all of that good stuff. New donors down here, again, this doesn't tell you a whole lot. So I would feel comfortable if you have the ability to run them through wealth screening, please, please, please do that. If you don't, then consider approaching them maybe with a monthly giving campaign or something like that. But give them a wide range of options for a monthly giving campaign. So in other words, don't kind of pigeonhole them at 15, 25, 35, and 50. Maybe throw out 25, 50, 100, and 200 a month or something like that. Give them a wide range of options. And then based on how they respond to that and what gifts they choose to give, you should be able to figure out where their capacity is, at least loosely. And then over here, these folks who are repeat donors, but below your average gift amount, these folks are going to be really good for a monthly gift, probably in the lower range. So if you can send them an email that talks about, hey guys, here's what $15 a month can accomplish if you choose to give that. And here's what 25 a month will do. And here's what 50 a month, and so on. Maybe give them 4 or 5 options there. That should be a fairly safe bet that they'll be able to jump on board with something there. And if they're a repeat donor, there's 60% likelihood to be retained. So they're already feeling good about you. They like what you're doing. They're supporting the mission that they care about. So throwing out a monthly gift idea with those folks will probably be fairly well received. So here are some other segments that you can approach. I really like this list here. I've got a couple on here that I'm just really, really fond of. My very favorite one is right in the middle, number 4, volunteers who have never donated. So we've done a lot of studies on volunteers here at Bloomerang. I find them fascinating, and there are all kinds of statistics that are really, really important when it comes to volunteers. Probably the number one of which is that volunteers are 10 times, their gift size is 10 times that of a non-volunteer. So they're going to give 10 times more than non-volunteers, and that just makes sense. So volunteers are on the front lines with you, right? They're in there doing stuff on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, however often they're volunteering with you, but they're seeing the impact of the good work that you're doing right there in front of them. They're seeing the people that you serve, or the animals that you serve, or however all of that works. They're seeing the impact that you're having in their community every day, and that's why they want to volunteer. They have decided that they want to change their little world, their community, and they see your organization as the best way to do that. So it's not much of a stretch at all to reach out to them and say, hey, we so really appreciate all of the time that you volunteered with us. Can we also have a conversation with you about a monetary gift as well? You're already donating your time, which we appreciate so, so much. You've seen what we're doing. Here specifically are the areas that we need some help with, and most of them are going to be very, very receptive to that. The other key thing with volunteers is that you should, after a few interactions with them as they volunteer, you should have a fairly decent idea about what they're passionate about. So you'll know based on what programs they like to volunteer with, or what kind of behind the scenes things they like to do. That should give you a nice picture of what they're passionate about, what they care about. That should allow you then to tailor those communications so that you can really approach them and appeal to them with whatever it is that they are so passionate about. That really increases the likelihood of success there. So aside from that, the other one that I like to really focus in on is number 5. If donors have shared feedback, or whether it's positive or negative with you, pay attention to that. If they've taken the time to send you an email, even to comment on social media, or give you feedback in person or anything like that, that means that they care pretty deeply. They may be upset about something, and that's painful and awkward to deal with. I totally understand that. It pushes us out of our comfort zone, and none of us like to do that. But it's not a bad habit to get into with apologizing, asking what we can do to make this right, that sort of thing, because those people care enough to approach you and have that conversation in the first place. Most of the time, when it's negative feedback, that's not something I like to do. I don't you know, it's not a, I know there are some people out there who really enjoy giving negative feedback, but for most of us, that's not something we really want to do. So if someone is taking the time to do that, take them seriously and approach them and apologize to them. And then don't ask them for a donation right then, but try to remember that, make a note of it, and maybe come back to that on down the line, because that can be really effective. So lots of different segments here, and these are really only the beginning. I've talked with schools that segment out based on alumni status or parents, grandparents of kids who went to the school, all kinds of stuff like that. If you think about, you know, animal welfare organizations, are you all approaching the people who adopted years ago? That's a great segment to approach because they probably, hopefully, still have their beloved animal with them, and you can really, you know, remind them of how much joy that has brought them, and hopefully they'll be open to giving at that point. So be creative. These are some basic ones here that Bloomerang has put together, but again, be creative. There are all kinds of things that you can do to really appeal to different segments in your donor world. So got a couple of stories of segmentation in action here. This is from Better Together RVA up in Richmond, Virginia. I picked this one because they're about an hour away from where I live. And they went out and segmented a couple of different ways here, as we're going to see over the next couple of slides here. So they looked at their current donors versus their lapsed donors, but then they broke it down into 4 different categories from there. So they looked at long-term donors, first-time donors, lapsed donors, and then event participants. And I want to really key in on event participants here for just a second, because I think that's a different segment that sometimes gets overlooked. So a lot of times when we're having a 5K or a gala or a golf tournament or whatever it is that we're having, we look at those people and we say, oh, good. All right, we got them to come in. We got them to run that 5K. That's awesome. That's amazing. We're going to talk to them next year about doing it again next year, and maybe next year we'll ask for a little bit more. Well, the thing is, my wife and I talk about this all the time. My wife is a runner. I am a jogger, let's call it generously, and we do 5Ks together a couple times a month, usually. Not right now. I live in Virginia and it's too cold. I'm so jealous of your 70-degree weather down there right now. I can't even tell you. So we don't run from about November to March, but the rest of the year we run a couple 5Ks a month. But we don't just, you know, kind of randomly pick 5Ks or organizations that we want to support. There are a lot of options, a lot. So we generally try to find something that we want to support, or, you know, if someone invites us to run or whatever, then yeah, we'll absolutely jump all over that. But the point is that we support organizations that we have some sort of connection to, or that we're interested in, or that are working in a cause that we care about at least a little bit there. So there's already something there for us. And yet, having said that, in the, I don't know, 20 or 30 or whatever that we've run in the last several years, I can list on 1 or 2 hands the number of organizations that have reached out to us to make an appeal outside of whatever that next event is going to be. So in other words, as donors, we've been siloed. We are event donors. That's how the organization looks at us. Okay, the Goalders are going to donate, but only when we run that 5K. And maybe we wouldn't. There's a chance that we would get an email or a direct mail or a phone call or, you know, any kind of communication, and we would say, it's not a great time for us right now. We're not going to do that. But there's also a really good chance that we would donate to some of those organizations outside of the event. So think through your event donors and how you're following up with them after the event to make sure that you're keeping that engagement and that connection going, and then also perhaps appealing to them outside of that event throughout the year, because I think you'll be a little bit surprised at how many people are willing to engage with you outside of that event. So at any rate, all of that to say, think through how those different segments, and then I love what Better Together did here, where they broke it down by current donors and lapsed donors. That's such a great way to appeal to your donors and see who's available to donate. So One of the things that I really like that they did here, Britt Nelson is their is their development director, and Britt and I are good friends, so I'm a little bit biased, but I think she's done a really fantastic job here of really conveying that we're all on the same team here. We're all pulling together for that common goal, and we just need a little bit of help from you. So I love the loyal support. As you can see there, it shows up a couple of times. It's a really nice way to firm up that connection with your donors. Again, let them know that we're all on the same team here. So the more that you can do that, the more that you show them that you know that they're special and that you really appreciate what they're doing, is really, really great. I really love this bottom bullet point down here. Customize the ask based on the giving. So in other words, think about running out your entire list for who you want to send this appeal to, and then look at their historical giving and break it down. So if someone is donating $100 every year to you, these dollar amounts down here don't make a lot of sense. But if they're donating 500, 600, 1,000, whatever, then these dollar amounts do make a lot of sense. So think through how you're approaching those different groups based on what they've given you in the past. If you want to add in an extra layer, think back to the wealth screening that I've been talking about a little bit, because if you can run that right in your database, then you may have some people who are donating $100 a year, but who have the capacity to donate 500, maybe even 5,000. And it would be great to know that so that you send them an appropriate piece of communication. And when I say appropriate piece of communication, in this case, I don't mean this little letter or postcard or whatever it is here. Yep, there's a cat. So if you have someone who's been giving you $100 a year, let's say, and you run them through Donor Search or Wealth Engine or whatever, and see that they actually have the capacity to donate 5,000, please don't send them something like this. Please pick up the phone and call them, schedule some time to chat, take them out to lunch, something along those lines. You want to have a different conversation with them at that point. Okay, so here are a couple of letter examples here. So just some, again, different verbiage that can be used here. I want to emphasize that as you're thinking about the different segments that hopefully you're going to dig into and send some different communications to, you don't need to start from scratch with every new segment that you have. Really, the way that this is ideally going to work is that you're going to have a basic template, and then you're going to make a couple of changes here and there to the verbiage, maybe some different links if it's an email. You might have some different images depending on who that audience is, but just little changes here and there. You don't need to start over from scratch and build everything from the ground up for each of those segments. So we have a couple of really nice, just examples of how you can plug and play some of these phrases, some of these sentences into those emails and letters that you're going to do, because I know how hard you all are working and how little time you have to start over from scratch every time. That's just not something that's going to happen. So here's what happened. So Better Together ran those segmentation lists. They had variable ask amounts, and they included some of those different phrasing into the appeals when they sent them out. And you can see that we got a nice bump. So the average gift amount went up substantially, $30 or so, something like that. I'm not great at math, so let's pretend that that's right. The revenue growth there at the bottom, though, y'all, that's good. I like seeing that. 23% just by segmenting out and approaching those different segments a little bit differently. So again, they came up with different audiences, and they went in with different ask amounts based on historical giving, and voila, got some really nice results there. So just really nice evidence there that digging in and figuring out how to approach people a little bit differently instead of the one size fits all really does yield some good results. We also talked to a Bloomerang user, Ask Childhood Cancer Foundation. That's one of the 5Ks that, well, funny story. That's one of the 5Ks that my wife and I run every year, because one of Emily's coworkers' children had cancer a couple of years ago. Thankfully, everything is a whole lot better now, which is wonderful. But she invited us to run their 5K, and we did. Quick note, my wife is super awesome, and she actually won her age group. I finished, and that's good. But Emily did fantastically well. And then these folks did a fantastic job of following up after their event. And we actually donate to them fairly regularly outside of the event now because they did a really good job following up with us. They also did some really cool things with, as you can see here, the very big hugs, kind of a cute little tagline there. And then they had a whole marketing push with that, with emails and all kinds of fun stuff as well. So what I really, really like that they did here is the $25 donation can provide the clinic with snacks for a day. So they're tying a specific dollar amount with what that accomplishes and everything that you can do with that. That was really helpful for me as a donor. That tells me, okay, cool. I'm not just going to donate 25 bucks and it's going to get lost in the ether and I don't know what they're going to do with it. It tells me, nope, this is going to their clinic. I'm providing snacks. That's fantastic. So again, you want to be careful the audience that you're sending that to. If their capacity is a lot higher than that, then you want to change that dollar amount, change that donation suggestion there. But tying it to something specific is a really, really good idea when you're able to do that. So hopefully what you've seen here is that we can segment out our appeal so that we're not sending the same message to the same people. We want to try to mix it up a little bit, send different messages. And what we want to do now is talk about how storytelling can impact that segmentation as well, because we saw some interesting things from 2020. So what we saw was that, and if we think back to 2020, this will make sense. What we saw is that organizations who told stories did more success, were more successful than organizations that did not. So we were really curious when we looked at organizations in 2020, specifically in March and April of 2020, how did their fundraising do? And we looked at two groups. So we looked at organizations that did appeal to donors versus organizations that didn't. And if we think back, and nobody wants to think back, so I won't dwell on this, but if we think back to March and April of 2020, it was crazy. Nobody knew what was going on, lockdowns and shutdowns and all of that. It was awful. Everyone wants to forget that ever happened. Organizations tended to respond to that one of two ways, right? You had a few organizations that said, you know what, we don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do. We're going to kind of hide and turtle a little bit. And I don't really find fault with them. It was really uncertain. Nobody knew what was happening day to day. I think we all wore sweatpants, probably the same pair of sweatpants for like 6 months or whatever it was. It was crazy. I totally understand it. But we did have organizations that tried to stay in front of their donors during that time as well. And they said, hey, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going to happen next, but we need your help. So we at Bloomerang looked at those two groups, compared their fundraising in 2020 versus their fundraising in 2019. And we found that the organizations that did appeal and that did tell those stories, their fundraising went up. The organizations that did not, their fundraising went down. So what when we saw all of that, we kind of dug in a little bit more and we looked at the emails that were sent. We looked at the phone calls that were made and all of that. And we saw number 4 here on this slide was really, really important. Personal touch. So think through how you can segment out your communications, but then make sure that it's a personal story that you're telling, that it's a personal connection that you're making. That proved to be incredibly important back there in 2020. And I think it holds true now as well. And one of the reasons that I think it holds true is this is probably my all-time favorite slide across all of the presentations that I've ever given, because I think it's incredibly important and insightful. Adrian Sargent at the Lilly School of Philanthropy did a study 20 years ago, and every study that I've seen on this topic replicated since then is virtually identical. Why do people stop giving? And I think everything on the left that we've highlighted can be boiled down to the one on the right that we've highlighted: poor service or communication. It's not fun. We don't like to think about it. Nobody likes to see that, but I think it's incredibly important to reckon with and make sure that we are communicating with our donors effectively. So if we stop and think about why are people donating to us, I think all of this makes a lot of sense. As I've mentioned before, people volunteer and donate with you specifically because they see what you are doing as incredibly important. They see it impact their community, and they want to get on your team and support and help you do more. If we're not communicating with them that we are in fact doing more and we are impacting our communities, they're probably not going to stick around. There are, in my tiny little town of Waynesboro, Virginia, there are 200 some odd nonprofit organizations that I can give to. And I live in a town with a population of like 22,000 or something like that. We're not a big town. There are a lot of nonprofits here that I can give to. And if I'm giving to someone and they're not communicating the impact that they're having, they're not telling those stories, I have a lot of other options that I can donate to. So let's make sure that we give them what they want. They want communication. And the reason that we know that is because of a study that was done 10 years ago that asked, why do donors keep giving? And that bottom answer really gives us the key, I think. They want information showing who is being helped. So we need to be careful with privacy concerns. Totally understand that. Have to be really careful if we need to make stories anonymous. It's all good. Do what you need to do. But we need to tell stories about who is being helped, because that's going to help with with most of the rest of this list. That will allow the donors to see the organization as being expected. That will allow them to feel like they're part of an important cause, and so on. So think through how we can tell those stories and how we can tap into the emotion in those stories to keep those donors coming back year after year. So when we think about stories, I always like showing this slide because I think it's a really good picture of what goes into really most stories. When we think about how to make a story really compelling, though, I think that we need to look at number one, and that's the characters. So who is the story about? So quick story, my oldest daughter, our oldest daughter, Larissa, lives in Chicago, travels, whatever it is, 45 minutes a day on the L to work, 45 minutes back. She reads a lot. And normally when I say that, people say, oh yeah, okay, so what, like 50 books a year or something like that? No. Last year, she read 150 books. We're on Goodreads together, and she reads a lot. I read a lot. Not that much, but I read whatever number I read, under 100, but it's still a lot. Usually I'm reading on the treadmill or when I'm traveling or whatever. And Larissa and I share books back and forth, recommendations, right? So I'll finish something and I'll say, hey, I think you should read this. I think you'd really enjoy it. And she does the same thing for me, but we don't do it with every book that we read. In fact, it's kind of rare, maybe one a month. We'll pick up the phone, send a text to the other and say, hey, you should check this out. And I started thinking about why that is, because we both, again, we read a lot more than one book a month. So what is it about those books that make me want to tell Larissa, hey, you should read this, and vice versa? And I really do think it comes down to that number one bullet point right there. So every story is going to have characters. It's going to have some sort of conflict, along with some change over time, with a resolution, with the goal, and all of that. I say every story. If you've ever read a book by James Joyce, maybe not every story, but most stories are going to have all of those components there. That's a nod, by the way, to me being an English major. Probably like one person got that joke and is chuckling a little bit to themselves. For everyone else, James Joyce does a lot of stream of consciousness, and his stories are incredibly difficult to get through. Anyway, for the rest of most of the books that we're reading here, you've got these elements here, but the ones that stand out to us are the ones with memorable characters, right? Those are the ones where you are really invested and you have a hard time putting that book down when you go to bed at night. You want to keep reading because you want to find out what happens to these characters. Yeah, the story is really important. The conflict is key. The goal, the change over time. Yeah, absolutely. but the ones where you get really invested are the ones with amazing characters. So think through how to include some details about your characters when you're writing these stories to appeal to those donor segments that we're looking at. I think, I can't remember if it was Karina or Mariel, but somebody mentioned that I'm on the board of a small farm here where I live. And one of the reasons that I'm on that board is because I went with our youngest daughter on a field trip probably 10 years ago now. And Sunny went and actually dug into the dirt and planted beet seeds and turnip seeds and some other stuff like that. And then she, put the soil back on top and watered it and did everything to get it ready to go, and then came back in a couple of weeks after that. Whoops. And there we go. And watered the seeds, and then weeded and did everything that you do to make sure that the plant is doing well. And then eventually she actually got to harvest those beets and those turnips and all of that. And then by golly, we ate beets and turnips as a family for the very first time. And since then, we've gotten pretty good at cooking beets, but it took a little while. But she wanted to do that. That was all driven by her, because she dug in the dirt and she nurtured those plants and she weeded the garden beds and then harvested the beets and all of that. She got us involved in eating beets. And that's a really cool story that farm can tell about a fourth grader who got involved and dug in the dirt and did all of that stuff. And now our entire family is eating more healthily because we've incorporated beets and turnips and all of that into our meals. So think about those kinds of stories that you can tell, because that's going to make a really big difference to your donors and to your potential donors and all of that. So again, I mentioned this earlier, segmentation doesn't mean impersonal. Make sure that you're customizing those stories, that you're talking about what things people are passionate about, and that you're using their names, not just dear donor or dear friend or something like that. Try to make sure that you're dropping in their name. Hopefully your software has the capacity to do all of that. But again, you don't have to create everything from scratch. Go in, have the outline in place, and then drive in some little pieces here and there to make sure that you're customizing and personalizing things. And mix things up. That's probably my favorite one out of everything on this slide here. Make sure that you're keeping things fresh, keep that message nice and new, and make sure that you're mixing things up as you go. I will throw out getting your board involved over there. I know boards tend to be real focused on staff and fundraising, but definitely budgets. This is a nice opportunity to get them involved if you can. Get them to record a video that you could send out in an email that talks about how important donors are and what kind of an impact that they're going to have and that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be long. It shouldn't be long. 30 seconds, a minute, something like that, but you can get your board to do that sometimes. So lots of good suggestions here. And there you go, an example of a video there. Those videos can be really impactful because it's a nice way for multiple viewpoints to be heard, whether it's staff, board, both. You can even get volunteers to talk through their contributions and why your mission is so important to them and so on. So think through those different options, because there's a lot of different ways that you can use those tools. So wrapping up here, please make sure that you have clean donor data. Talk to a consultant. If you're considering a new donor database, ask them or whoever you're considering if they will help you clean up that data when you bring your data into that new system. They should help you with that. Make that a part of your evaluation process. Think about how to segment your appeals, and then definitely use empathy and emotions in your storytelling, and keep in mind that the personal touch absolutely works there. Here's some information about Bloomerang, so you can use the QR code. And as I mentioned, I think these slides will be sent out in the next couple of days, so you can don't feel like you have to grab all this information right now, but that'll take you to I think it's a demo of Bloomerang page, so you can jump on that and learn some more about us if you'd like to. And then my email is here. And I know that some people aren't comfortable asking questions in a chat in this kind of a setting. Totally cool. I understand that completely. Feel free to shoot me an email afterwards if you'd like to, and we can just dialogue back and forth that way if you'd prefer. For the folks who are comfortable using the chat button, please go ahead and shoot any questions that you have that way now if you'd like to. And yeah, Tracy, the slide deck will be shared. Yes, good question.
Thank you so much, James. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat just yet, but we did have a few come through with the registration. So we can get started with those. And if anybody has any questions, please do add them to the chat. We've got about 6 minutes to take some questions and answers. So the first one, and James, since these came in before the presentation, they may or may not be aligned with what you were presenting on. So feel free to pass if it doesn't connect with your content. So the first question is, how can nonprofits effectively use social media and online platforms to gather data for donor segmentation and engagement?
Ooh, I love that question. And I hate that question because it's hard. Facebook specifically makes it really hard to gather the information that you need, and by extension, then therefore Instagram. There are a few things you can do depending on the database that you have and its connections or ability to connect to something like Zapier. You may be able to pull in some data that way. But Facebook very famously, especially with their online donation portal, they've just changed a lot of rules. And I'll be really honest, I'm not completely up to date with all of that yet. But Facebook famously does make it really difficult to get that information, unfortunately. I was hoping the question was going to be about how you can thank your donors using Facebook, because that's a great idea. But as far as getting data from any of these platforms, unfortunately, they make it really difficult to do that. I find it mildly infuriating how difficult it is. Even when someone is donating to your organization through Facebook, they really make it hard to get that information. So I wish I had a better answer or a better tool for you. But I don't, unfortunately.
Thank you, James. If you do have anything to share about how to thank donors on Facebook, feel free to share. We still don't have any questions coming in, and I'm sure anybody would be happy to have more recommendations for that.
If you, as far as that goes, if you know someone's social media handle, whether it's Twitter, Insta, Facebook, whatever it is, that can be a great way, especially for your younger donors on the appropriate platform to thank them. So I have two 20-something-year-olds, and they talk about that they have donated before to an organization and been thanked on Twitter and Insta, if I remember correctly, and they both talk about how great that is. So if you have that information or are able to thank them, yes, it's a wonderful way to connect and engage with those folks.
Awesome, thank you. So one more question. Oh, looks like we've got a question in the chat box here from Tracy. What types of internal data do you suggest teams capture to further segment? We are asked to track types of contacts.
So one of my favorite things that you can track internally, if you can either figure it out through designating a fund or through conversations with your donors, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit, Tracy, is what are they passionate about? What is it that caused them to donate? And were they donating to a specific program, or what was it that kind of caused them to donate at that moment? If you can figure that out, again, maybe it's through conversation, or if they are able to designate a fund on your online donation form, then you can really tailor future appeals towards that area that they are passionate about. The example I always use is my wife, who is a literacy coach in the public school system here. And so organizations that have figured that out and that are aligned somewhat with kids' literacy, something like that, they've done a really nice job from time to time of kind of saying, hey, we're trying to build a library here and we'd really like your help. That's a pretty guaranteed donation from my wife. She'll get that and say, yep, we will absolutely support that. So if you're able to track that sort of thing, that can usually pay dividends on down the line.
Thank you so much, James. So it looks like it's just about 3 o'clock. So we're At the end of our webinar hour, a big thank you to James Goalder for sharing this incredibly thoughtful presentation. Thank you to everyone that joined us today. Again, we'll be sharing the recording and slide deck in the next week. And please reach out to us if you have any questions, and keep your eyes out for upcoming webinars. Any last words, James, before we wrap up?
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful. Thank you for the participation, and thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, James. Have a good afternoon, everybody.